we have Restart, which is a competitive game where players are time travelers, traveling between the past and the present, taking actions both as their adult and child selves in order to try and prevent a dystopian future. What's really cool about this is that this game actually offers a few different dystopian possibilities, and each one is going to be changing the game in a significant way. Players could be trying to prevent an environmental collapse, or maybe mass infertility, or maybe trying to fight back against a global pandemic, or maybe trying to prevent an evil totalitarian world government. To set up a game, you're going to be choosing one of these scenarios and then trying to earn the most victory points by trying to achieve the specific goals of that scenario. The game plays over 3 different ages that's represented by this tableau of cards, with each of the rows representing a different age. Each round, players are going to be using these cards or cards from their hand in order to take various actions. These different cards are one of the primary ways that players are going to be taking their actions in the game and acquiring different resources, and you're going to be maintaining a hand of these, and you can either play them into this tableau, or you could also play them into your player board. When placing them into your player board, you only have a few different slots to hold these cards, so you can only have a limited amount of them. You're going to be gaining the benefits of these cards for all your following rounds, and what's really nice about this is that each of these cards can actually grant you multiple benefits if you are able to provide enough resources into the track located on the left of that card. The higher that you're able to push up on that track, the more of the benefits you're going to be gaining. Each player also has 2 figures out on that shared tableau. One of the figures is going to be representing your character as an adult, while the other represents your character as a child. On your turn, you're allowed to move just one of these figures according to their movement restrictions. The adult can move to any card as long as there's not already a figure there, whereas the child is always going to be remaining in the row that represents the current era. So you're only able to move your child within that row, which doesn't give you a whole lot of options, but since the children automatically move up at the start of the next era, you can always try to position yourself better to get a card that you really want for the following round. But whenever you move one of these characters, you'll also be able to put one of the cards from your hand into that specific location, and that's going to be granting you the action of that card. But you can also create different patterns, and depending on what card you put into play, it can chain off the cards around it in order to give you some additional bonuses. The location of your adult character is going to be determining your primary action for the round, whereas the location of the child character will give you some sort of secondary action. Of course, it's always best if these 2 actions augment each other, so you will be trying to time these positionings along with which cards you play from your hand to try and get the best benefits as possible. But after the players have taken their actions, you're going to be moving into a special phase in the game, because this is the phase that's determined by the particular dystopian future that you're playing for this game. Each of the dystopian scenarios have their own unique mechanisms that players are going to be using to try and complete that specific scenario's goals. Each of these basically allow the player to choose one of 2 different actions at this point, but the actual nature of those actions can vary quite a bit between the different scenarios, with one of them allowing you to try and take your actions through dice rolling, whereas another might use a bit of abstract strategy and pattern building, whereas one actually uses a pad and pencil, and the last one will be using cards and set collection. But there is always a third option here as well, and that is just to skip taking an action entirely. And if you do choose to do that, you're going to be doubling the amount of resources that you get for this round. At the end of your turn, there's some actions you can take to get additional event cards for the following round, or to get additional resources, which are basically used throughout the entirety of the game for different purposes, such as taking different actions, improving actions, unlocking those different upgrades, or even as part of those scenario-specific actions or objectives. And the game continues like this over the 3 ages, and then the player with the most points at the end of it wins the game. But something else that is really interesting about this game that I hadn't mentioned yet is that rather than going back in time and making all these changes and going back into the future leading you to prosperity, players can instead choose to have avoided that particular dystopian future, but instead sent themselves down a path to a new one. If you want to play the game that way, you can actually chain these different dystopian futures together, maintaining your different upgrades and state and developments from game to game, with each game having a potentially different winner, but with all the games creating their own little bit of a story. If all that sounds interesting to you, you can check out this campaign, and I'll have it linked in the description down below.